America's space shuttle has played a large role in the creation of a more permanent presence in space, the International Space Station. New hardware such as this restowable solar array is tested on orbit, a method which is helping engineers design lightweight, compact structures for the station. Even devices to transport crew along the space station's 350-foot truss were tested on orbit. Several times the payload bay of the space shuttle has had to be converted to be able to carry space labs, which enables them to carry the scientific laboratories planned for the International Space Station. The body's adaptation to weightlessness is the main focus of life science experiments. Muscles and bones deteriorate rapidly without gravity, and aboard the International Space Station, astronauts conduct research to find out why and test possible countermeasures to allow for extended missions. The high-tech marketplace also benefits from research aboard the space station. Valuable new developments are being made in the fields of materials, bioscience, and electronics. Protein crystals, for example, can be grown larger and more uniform in space. Researchers want to utilize testing in the space station to unlock the molecular structure of proteins. Proteins are large molecules that perform key functions in our bodies. This would then result in drugs designed to target specific diseases and viruses. The state-of-the-art laboratory that is the International Space Station will contain more than 100 scientific instruments. These will be used to create better alloys, more efficient semiconductors, and solar energy systems. The research conducted on the Space Center will revolutionize our lives in the same way that the Apollo missions created technology for computers, laser surgery, long-distance calling, and even ATM machines. Unlike the Space Shuttle, which only spends a few weeks in the Earth's orbit, the space station is designed for a long-term stay. "18 shuttle missions carried the prefabricated sections of the International Space Station into orbit. Robotic arms were used to assist astronauts with the assembly. Power systems had to be fine-tuned to be able to power the station's electrical demands. Many prototype components were built and tested before sections were flown up by the Space Shuttle. The space station crews spend from 3 to 6 months at a time living, working and observing from the space station's unique vantage point. The future of international space programs are based on the ability to work in space on a permanent basis. The International Space Station is providing that ability and a solid step forward in the direction of experimentation in space. On October 18, 1989, the Space Shuttle Atlantis carried the Galileo spacecraft and its two-stage rocket into low Earth orbit. The rocket was released from the shuttle, moved to a safe distance, and fired, sending Galileo on a one-way trip to Jupiter. The orbiter had become the first known artificial satellite of the giant planet. The total cost of the mission was a little over $1.39 billion, which allowed the spacecraft to carry the latest devices to measure temperature, pressure, cloud particles, and atmospheric composition, as well as a probe targeted for deployment onto Jupiter's turbulent surface. The probe would provide the first direct sampling of the Jovian atmosphere and was a forerunner for future probes designed to explore the Sun and satellites like Titan with considerable atmospheres. The probe descended into Jupiter to analyze and directly sample its atmosphere, believed to be original material from which the solar system was formed 4.6 billion years ago. The Galileo mission, named after the Italian astronomer who discovered Jupiter's 4 large satellites, had been designed to use the gravity of those moons to bend the spacecraft's flight path during its 24-month tour of the Jovian system. As the probe sampled the Jovian atmosphere, scientific results were relayed to the orbiter for an hour before the probe's signal was lost at pressures of 10 to 20 Earth atmospheres. Galileo then made a close flyby of Io to study the moon's volcanic surface. Io's gravity, in turn, bent the trajectory of the spacecraft, helping to send it into orbit around Jupiter. Flying just 1,000 kilometers above the surface, images of the moon showed features as small as 50 meters. After relaying science data to Earth, the spacecraft orbited Jupiter 28 more times, making a close flyby of one of the Galilean satellites on each orbit, yielding high-resolution images, detailed measurements of their surfaces, gravity, and magnetic fields. As the orbiter rotates around Jupiter, the spacecraft sampled all regions of the planet. The first full orbit of Jupiter brought Galileo to its first encounter with Ganymede. The gravitational effect of the close equatorial flyby reduced the length of the spacecraft's orbit from 200 to 90 days. Using photographic data from Voyager, this computer-simulated flyby of Ganymede shows Galileo's view of the icy moon. Scientists now believe it has a frozen mantle 700 kilometers deep. Galileo flew even closer to Ganymede during its second encounter with the moon. Each satellite pass modified Galileo's orbit, sending the spacecraft onto its next encounter. Each flyby was 20 to 100 times closer than the Voyager encounters. Voyager saw only the equatorial regions of these icy moons. Galileo was able to photograph the North Pole of Ganymede to provide a new perspective in the study of these large and distant satellites. The ancient cratered terrain of Callisto was closely studied as Galileo passed over the southern hemisphere of the outermost Galilean satellite. Unlike the other moons, Callisto seems more like a uniformly dense sphere, indicating that most of its rock and ice are mixed together. The spacecraft also swept within 200 kilometers of the surface of Europa at the end of its 8th revolution of Jupiter. Galileo's Europa encounters gave a first look at the moon's mysteriously fractured surface, seen by other spacecraft no better than we see Earth's moon through a small telescope. During its extensive mission, Galileo expanded our knowledge of Jupiter and the 17 diverse worlds in orbit around it, revealing in detail the bodies and workings of this miniature solar system. And best of all, Galileo is really just at the beginning of all that's humanly possible. The Hubble Space Telescope, the most powerful observatory ever built, was launched in 1990 by the shuttle Discovery. It is able to take detailed images 15 billion miles away and has provided astronomers with a deep insight into the universe. The huge space telescope has been sending a steady stream of information to computers on Earth despite a fault in the 94-inch primary mirror that was discovered early after its launch. New processing techniques such as enhancement brings more detail to Hubble's pictures, which ultimately benefits its scientists. Hubble uses the same data processing method as other spacecraft such as Voyager. A galaxy 52 million light-years away from Earth, from original image to cleaned up final version. Displayed here are light pulses going in a straight line between Earth and a faraway quasar. Albert Einstein concluded years ago that if a uniform object crossed the path, light would bend into a ring. But if the objects were not uniform, the ring would break up into 4 patches. This theory, known as the Einstein cross, was reconfirmed by Hubble. A celestial X marking the precise position of a black hole was shown to scientists by Hubble. The mass of this particular black hole was 1 million of our suns. In 1993, astronauts were trained to fix the Hubble's mirror problem. A special component within the telescope was repaired through substitution. Labeled CoStar, the new optics system contained a series of mirrors that replicated a contact lens and restored Hubble to near full imaging potential. Inside NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center is the clean room. Here, technicians are practicing removing the telescope's star tracker, which helps to point the telescope. However, the Hubble continues to send back beautiful pictures of planets, black holes, distant galaxies, and faraway stars. The Mir space station is no more, but until recently, this floating constructor set was the pride of Russia. One person fortunate enough to experience life aboard Mir before its ultimate demise was American astronaut Jerry Lineker, who conducted a tour of the aging spacecraft. As crew physician, Jerry began with the medical console which he used to monitor the health of his fellow astronauts. He was able to test blood pressure, get hemoglobin counts and EKG readings, which were all sent via telemetry to the surgeon at Mission Control. To warm up meals aboard the station, canned foods were slotted into this cooker device for around 5 to 10 minutes. With the door closed, the crew were able to use the unit as a makeshift dining table. A second oven device, shaped like a small suitcase, was strapped to the ceiling so as not to get in the way. On the other side of the food preparation area was the commander's post, manned at the time by Russian mission commander Vasily, who controlled the station's flight path, main life support systems, and communications. While the commander kept a close eye on his scope and computer monitors, his main concern was a warning alarm panel to his left. Lineker explained that in his 4.5-month stay aboard Mir, they'd seen enough flashing lights on the warning panel to last a lifetime. Jerry now heads towards one of the last US modules added to Mir, called Feroda, or Module E. Most of the life science and microgravity equipment was housed here, so that the American astronauts could conduct their experiments aboard the station. Each module carried its own space fire extinguisher, which looks and works a little differently to those used on Earth. Fortunately, they do the same job. Oxygen breathing devices were also stored nearby. Both items came in very handy when a fire broke out aboard the station. Towards the end of the Feroda unit was another smaller module, but a strange thing happened whenever an astronaut entered this back room. The unit was on a 90-degree angle, so what was once the floor suddenly became the wall, and vice versa. Zero gravity, they discovered, does allow for some very unusual architecture in space. Perhaps even stranger than the room itself was what was stored inside. Thousands of little black beetles needed for a series of scientific experiments. Jerry and the crew joked that the only thing they feared more than a fire was for all those beetles to escape. This was the secondary airlock module, which was identical to the primary airlock, so it could be used in case of emergencies. An astronaut entered this room prior to a spacewalk and uses this equipment to go from station power to suit power. The controls allow an astronaut to open and close the depressurization valves to connect suit tubes in order to get pressure to the suit and remove much of the moisture that built up during the EVA. This unit was the spacesuit cooling system. An astronaut basically plugged these tubes into the suit to get cool air blowing into it. Exercise is very important on long trips in space, so Mia had 2 treadmills to help keep crew members fit. The control panel only ever offered 2 settings, sprint or walk. And as Jerry warned, you hit sprint, you'd better be ready to run. The space bathroom was as small and as compact as the rest of the station, which is a fairly apt description for the space toilet as well. The cover lifted up, and solid waste was stored in a container at the base of the unit until it needed to be replaced by an unfortunate crew member. And finally, if things ever got too scary, there was always the Soyuz rescue vehicle for a quick escape, an option that many a Mir astronaut was believed to have considered, especially in the last few years of the faltering station's existence. In June 1994, the Ulysses spacecraft began an expedition over the poles of the Sun. Its mission? To study the Sun and the solar atmosphere expanding into space. Little is known about this star at the centre of our solar system, yet it dominates all of life on Earth. To reach the high solar latitudes never before explored, the spacecraft used the gravity of an immense planet, Jupiter, to bend its flight path out of the plane in which the planets orbit. Looping back inwards towards the Sun, the spacecraft will then journey onto the Sun's southern pole. Ulysses was launched on October 6, 1990 aboard the Space Shuttle Discovery. 9 science experiments study the solar wind and energetic particles streaming outward from the Sun's corona. The experiments will also study cosmic rays entering the solar system from interstellar space. "16 months and 575 million miles after launch, the spacecraft began these investigations after its arrival at Jupiter. The closest approach occurred on February 8, 1992. The experiments would be used to study the region dominated by the rotating magnetic fields of Jupiter called the magnetosphere. Particles trapped within Jupiter's magnetosphere come from 3 sources: the solar wind, Jupiter's upper atmosphere, and Jupiter's moons. One of Jupiter's moons contributes gas to the Jovian magnetosphere at a rate of nearly 1 ton per second. This gas becomes ionized and forms a ring called a plasma torus that circles the planet. Ulysses will measure the composition of this donut-shaped plasma ring. At greater distances, a rotating sheet of plasma encircles Jupiter. Centrifugal force slowly drives gas in the plasma sheet outward until it eventually escapes from Jupiter. Outside Jupiter's magnetosphere is the solar wind. This wind blows at speeds of about 1 million miles per hour. The wind can't penetrate the Jovian magnetosphere, but is deflected around it. Ulysses' predecessors, the Pioneer Voyager spacecraft, entered the Jovian magnetosphere when the local time was near noon and exited in the pre-dawn region of the planet. The Ulysses spacecraft followed a path similar to its predecessors as it entered, but left on the dusk side of the planet. During its 10-day tour of the Jovian system, Ulysses performed experiments and explored regions of the magnetosphere not visited by other spacecraft. From there, Ulysses would be on its way to explore the poles of the Sun. If man is ever to free himself from laborious or dangerous tasks, he must develop smarter and more sophisticated systems. Not only to make life easier and to expand his technological horizons, but to create opportunities. Opportunities here on Earth, on the space station, and on other planets. Making this technological growth a reality requires an automation and robotics infrastructure where theories can be advanced and new ideas developed. NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas is home to just such a center. Through it, NASA offers its extensive experience with teleoperated systems in space, development experience in robotic technology, and know-how in extending human work capacity in hostile environments. This undersea robot has been adapted to emulate one of the space station's many dexterous manipulators. By emulating this key component, designers are able to run high-fidelity simulations on other station hardware that must interact with it. Doing so, very specific functions can be developed here and ultimately be used in space. Multiple views of the robot in motion, designers can analyze the assembly sequence for the space station and can even predict hindrances at the actual worksite. After the final design is proposed, kinematic analysis is used again to verify accuracy right down to visual access and placement of handholds. This robot is called DART and is a uniquely flexible test bed for fine-tuning the balance between the human and the telerobotic in the performance of skilled manipulation tasks.